Hey guys, Joe here. Just got back from our shortened version of the Vermont Gravel Growler. So we did about half of the Gravel Growler. It was 120 miles in total. We spread it out over 5 days. It was pretty manageable for our first extended ride like this. We decided to Airbnb it since it was going to be late October and we weren't really sure what the weather was going to be like. Day one of the trip was fairly warm. It was like in the mid 40s, but then it ended up raining. So we got a little wet about an hour or so into the first day. The clamp for my front brake and chain ring shifter came loose. And so it was just flopping down and I had to keep pulling it back up. The Allen key set that we had brought along with us turned out to be imperial and not metric. So I couldn't actually torque it down with the tool that we had. So I managed to tighten it a little bit at one of the stops that we made, but 10 minutes later it was loose again and flopping down. Our first brewery stop was Von Trapp, which I wasn't very excited about. I don't think my wife was excited about, but it was fantastic to just be somewhere warm and get a beer and get some food. And then we rode a little bit further and went to Idle Time. Idle Time was great. We just happened to get sat next to their fireplace, which we ended up taking over the mantle and putting all our gloves and hats and stuff in front of it. So as we were making our last couple of miles to the Airbnb, it started to sleet and we got to the Airbnb. It was great. It had cable. We were able to watch some of the Red Sox game, but we were tired, so we didn't last very long. We woke up on day 2 to a nice layer of snow and ice all over everything. So we bundled up, headed out. There was a bike shop actually right near between where we were staying and where we were getting breakfast. So we stopped there. They didn't have a bike mechanic in that day, but one of the guys grabbed some of the tools, tightened up my brake clamp, and it stayed held tight the rest of the trip. So disaster averted. That was actually the only technical issue we had on the whole trip. I think we didn't get any flats or anything like that. On the second day, it was cold. It was like 30, I think 38 was the high for the day. It was partly cloudy, so it was still pretty nice. It was just a nice ride. We only did 20 miles that day. We stopped at Lost Nation for lunch. After we left Lost Nation, we headed over to a grocery store, bought a bunch of supplies for dinner, and then made the final trek up to our Airbnb. We stayed at the Dream Haven of Vermont. Our host, Garrett, was great. She was really excited about our trip, and I think said she was going to post on bikepacking.com that bikers are welcome. So if you're doing this trip, definitely recommend trying to see if you can book their place. I'll try and leave a link in the description. Day 3 was about 25 miles. It was a gorgeous day. It was in the 50s, sunny. So it was a really fantastic day for riding. We ended up taking a slight detour out of the original route so that we could stop in Craftsbury to go to one of the country stores and get lunch instead of having to pack a lunch in the night before. That way we didn't have to buy stuff. Craftsbury was a cute little town. There were 2 little country stores. The brewery we went to that day was Hill Farmstead, which if you haven't been there, it's fantastic. The beer is great. The location is spectacular. I definitely recommend Hill Farmstead, even if you're not doing this trip, just checking it out if you're in Vermont. There were a ton of dogs there, which was awesome. From there, we had a short ride to the Highland Lodge where we were staying that night, which is on Caspian Lake. It had an awesome view of the lake. We rolled in right about sunset. It was beautiful. They have a restaurant there that had live music. Good spot. The cabin we stayed in was nothing to write home about, but it was still a great location. Day 4 was our longest day. We did about 36 miles. It was also a really nice day out. 50s again, partly cloudy. Great riding day. again, we had breakfast at Island Lodge and then got a pretty good early start to the day compared to the other days. We went up a pretty good hill that was actually a really nice ride for how steep it was. It was Buffalo Hill Road or something like that, Buffalo Mountain. But then eventually that turned into what was one of the harder parts of the trip. It was just a class 4 road that had tons of mud puddles. My wife Andrea was a little bit miserable. She stepped in one of the puddles, and so her foot was soaked for the rest of the day. As we were getting to the end of the class 4 road that was kind of a slog, my GoPro memory card filled up. So I didn't really get any GoPro footage for the rest of the day, or the last day, but we'll get to the last day, it didn't really matter. But I realized afterwards I could have just taken the memory card out of the drone, which was 128 gig memory card versus the 32 gig that I had in the GoPro. So oops. For lunch, we stopped at the Maple Country store. Shortly after we left the store for lunch, we ended up actually splitting up into 2 groups. Andrea went with our friend Jesse, and they took sort of the Google Map short, more direct route to our Airbnb. My friend Tyler and I went and took a slightly longer, windier route that took us down some single track that was actually super fun. The views were great. It wasn't too technical, but it was still somewhat challenging. So it was a really fun ride. That night we went to Three Penny Tap Room, which had awesome hamburgers. So day 5 was supposed to be the easiest. There weren't any big hills. It was just supposed to be some nice, generally downhill back to our cars, 15 miles. We decided to skip breakfast because we figured we'd be there in no time. It was not easy, however. It was, I think, a high of 35-ish. It was sleeting the whole time, and there was like a 20-mile-an-hour headwind the entire time. Going up hills, even going down hills, like we weren't picking up any speed, so it was just a slog this last day where we just wanted to get back to our cars and get some food. I did get a couple nice little shots, even though it was crappy out. There were still some nice views that we rode through, so I shouldn't complain too much because it was still beautiful and we had a blast. Closing thoughts, totally manageable for a relative beginner such as myself. You know, we did a couple overnight trips to try and prep. Really, it was just like day rides here and there. There aren't any hills around our house that are really comparable to what we did in Vermont. Considering all that, it was very manageable. I think the Univega performed admirably, and it was fun trying to tinker with it and make it usable, workable for this. I think its Achilles heel was the gearing. Even with the mega range, there wasn't quite enough gearing between the mega range and the next gear up. I could have really used another gear because I would be downshifting as we were going up, and then the next gear would be the mega range and it would be too low, so I'd start spinning, I'd switch it back, but then I had lost too much momentum, so the next gear over, so it was just kind of a mess. I think for next time, I'm gonna need a new bike. It's totally doable, but definitely could have been easier. I'll post a link in the description to the route on Ride with GPS. People want to try and do it. If you don't want to do the full 250-mile gravel growler, you can try the shortened one that we did. Hit a lot of good breweries. Definitely a good starting route to try for a multi-day thing. There was never really a point where, you know, we were too far from anything from provisions, so you know, we didn't pack any food except for some snacks to have along the way. All the places we stayed were relatively on the route. We didn't have to really adjust our route too much to go to any of our lodging. So definitely a great way to ease into it. Thanks for watching.